This story of Thomas Campbell is a tale that intertwines loyalty, betrayal, and meticulously orchestrated violence, and it unfolds like a thriller from the streets of Manchester. It captures the descent of a man into the world of organized crime, fueled by personal turmoil and a complex relationship with his childhood friend and eventual wife, Colleen Campbell. Thomas Campbell's descent into a life of crime, 2002 to 2021. Thomas Campbell's life began in Manchester between 1983 and 1984, but what started as a relatively ordinary childhood quickly spiraled into a path of criminal activity. His first significant brush with the law occurred in 2002 at the age of 19 when he was arrested for a violent robbery, during which he brandished a samurai sword. This marked the start of a long criminal record, culminating in a conviction that landed him a 9-year prison sentence. Though he served 6 years before being released in 2008, the time spent behind bars fundamentally changed him. Upon release, he emerged into a world that was still intertwined with the shadows of his past. Rather than breaking free from the cycle of crime, he became further entrenched in illegal activities, solidifying his reputation in Manchester's underworld. It was during this period that Thomas reconnected with Colleen, a childhood friend who shared a similar background of personal struggle. Their reunion marked the beginning of a toxic and ultimately destructive relationship. By the time Thomas was released from prison, his connection to criminal networks had deepened. In 2010, he was convicted again, this time for possession with the intent to supply illegal substances. Despite the conviction, Thomas continued his criminal pursuits, becoming a key player in a Manchester-based crime network that focused on drug distribution. By 2013, Thomas Campbell had established himself as a prominent figure in the city's underworld. Over the years, police intelligence had linked him to various drug-related offenses, but his public persona remained that of a successful fitness instructor. He meticulously worked to cover his tracks, routinely hiding money and drugs in buried locations, ensuring that little evidence could be found on his premises. This clandestine lifestyle allowed him to avoid major legal consequences for years. However, his growing involvement in crime would eventually catch up with him. The toxic relationship with Colleen Campbell and its fallout. Thomas Campbell's personal life was as turbulent as his criminal endeavors. Colleen Campbell had grown up in Clayton, East Manchester, raised by her mother in a single-parent household after her father was imprisoned on drug-related charges. She and Thomas rekindled their friendship during a night out, and their relationship quickly evolved. Despite being aware of Thomas's criminal background, Colleen accepted his lifestyle, perhaps because of her own exposure to criminality. In 2010, Colleen gave birth to their first child, a son. However, even fatherhood couldn't pull Thomas away from his life of crime. That same year, he faced another conviction, marking the beginning of deeper involvement in drug trafficking. Their relationship appeared stable for a while, and in 2011, the couple married and settled in Clayton. On the surface, they seemed to be enjoying a life of luxury, jet-setting to expensive destinations, flaunting fancy cars, and posting pictures of their extravagant holidays on social media. But beneath the glamorous facade, cracks in their relationship began to show. Thomas's paranoia and growing suspicions about Colleen's fidelity while he was serving time in prison contributed to the deterioration of their marriage. By the time he was released, he became increasingly confrontational, accusing Colleen of having affairs and placing tracking devices on her car to monitor her movements. In retaliation, Colleen accused Thomas of physical violence and making threats. Their once loving relationship turned toxic, with both parties hurling accusations at each other, but neither pursued formal legal action. The police were involved on multiple occasions, but no further steps were taken. The tension between them reached a breaking point when Colleen discovered that Thomas had been unfaithful, not with a stranger, but with her best friend. This betrayal was too much for Colleen to bear, leading to a violent outburst in which she destroyed her friend's car. Colleen was arrested for criminal damage, and the marriage between her and Thomas officially ended in 2021 when they filed for divorce. Even after the divorce, their relationship remained volatile, with threats and anger simmering beneath the surface. Colleen once left a cryptic message for Thomas, saying, "Revenge is best served cold, and I can be the coldest MF you ever meet." This foreshadowing would take on a chilling significance in the months to come. Thomas Campbell's return to the UK and the deadly plot unfolds. Following his release from prison and the end of his marriage, Thomas Campbell attempted to move on with his life. However, his criminal activities did not cease. Operating under the radar, Thomas relied on EncroChat, an encrypted messaging platform that was favored by organized criminals for its supposed security. This platform allowed him to continue his illegal dealings while staying out of the authorities' grasp, or so he thought. When law enforcement cracked the encryption of EncroChat, it led to the exposure of a vast criminal network. Thomas, growing fearful that his involvement might be uncovered, decided to leave the UK. He moved first to Marbella, then to Dubai, seeking refuge from potential prosecution. Despite his efforts to distance himself from the dangers in the UK, Thomas returned to Manchester to maintain a relationship with his children. He bought an expensive townhouse in Greater Manchester and moved in with a new partner, hoping to start fresh while still keeping ties with his family. Despite the turbulent past with Colleen, they agreed to co-parent, attempting to provide some semblance of normalcy for their children. However, Colleen harbored deep-seated resentment toward Thomas. She was furious that he had moved on with another woman, and her threats of revenge lingered in the background. To make matters worse, Thomas's new partner was the ex-girlfriend of another known criminal, a man who had significant connections in Manchester's organized crime scene. This detail escalated tensions in ways that Thomas did not anticipate. In the end, the unraveling of Thomas Campbell's life came not from his enemies in the underworld, but from within his closest circle. Betrayals and long-standing grudges culminated in a violent, orchestrated attack that would shock the entire nation. Thomas Campbell's life of crime, luxury, and betrayal ended in a tragedy that serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that lie in the shadows of the criminal world. This story, set against the backdrop of Manchester's criminal underworld, leaves us with a sobering realization: no matter how deeply one tries to hide from their past, the consequences of their actions will eventually catch up. The unfolding rivalry. John Belfield's path to revenge. John Belfield, driven by jealousy and a deep-seated sense of rivalry, found himself tangled in an escalating feud with Thomas Campbell. John's anger towards Thomas was rooted in his ex-girlfriend's new relationship with him. The animosity was palpable from the moment John discovered their relationship, and it ignited a fire that fueled his desire for revenge. This was not just a passing feeling of bitterness or envy. John's words and actions indicated that he was prepared to go to extreme lengths to settle the score. The first signs of John's obsession with revenge appeared in a chilling text message he sent to his ex, threatening both her and Thomas. John's message carried an ominous tone. "You and that helmet will get domed. You will never have a boyfriend. You will have to move country. Give it a week, and you will see why, and what happens when you take the piss. Why would I ever respect you when you're seeing Tom Campbell?" The violent implications in this message made it clear that John was plotting something more than mere words. He intended to take action. While John's motivations were driven by personal vendetta, Colleen, Thomas's ex-wife, would soon find herself involved in his plot. Colleen and Thomas had a contentious relationship, and the bitterness between them only escalated after their separation. John's and Colleen's resentment for Thomas quickly united them, despite having never met before. On June 25, 2022, Colleen received a follow request from John on social media. Initially, she didn't realize the depth of his motives and simply thought of him as an admirer. However, their communication quickly evolved into something far more sinister. In a matter of days, Colleen and John exchanged 35 phone calls and 68 messages, quickly bonding over their shared bitterness. John was seeking vengeance against his ex and her new partner, while Colleen, equally fueled by resentment, desired retribution against her former husband. Their conversations painted a clear picture of two individuals whose desire for revenge had overshadowed their sense of morality. They decided to rob Thomas, targeting his wealth, jewelry, and any illicit items he might have hidden. Despite the complexity of the plan, neither John nor Colleen seemed to fully comprehend the dangers that lay ahead. This reckless miscalculation would set off a chain of events that would end in tragedy. The setup: tracking Thomas Campbell. On June 27, 2022, John made his first move. Colleen, using her inside knowledge of Thomas's schedule, informed John that he was on his way to pick up their daughter from school. This provided John with a critical opportunity to set his plan into motion. John enlisted two men, 29-year-old Reese Stephen and 39-year-old Stephen Quith, to assist him in tracking Thomas's movements. While John watched from his car, Reese and Stephen discreetly attached a tracking device to Thomas's vehicle. Colleen played a pivotal role in this stage of the plot. She not only informed John of Thomas's whereabouts, but also provided essential details, such as the description of his car. Her involvement was crucial to ensuring the success of their plan. Later that day, John and Stephen used the tracking device to follow Thomas and surveil his home. As they began mapping out the next steps of their plan, John messaged Colleen again, requesting additional information. Colleen responded with the house number -17, giving John and his associates everything they needed to continue with their scheme. That evening, John returned to Thomas's house, this time with Reese, to identify the property. Colleen and John had not yet met in person, but that would soon change. The next day, they arranged to meet near Colleen's beauty salon. Sitting in her car, Colleen and John reviewed the tracking data on John's phone, which showed Thomas's location. Though the exact details of their conversation remain unknown, it's clear that they solidified their plan during this meeting. The following day, on June 30, 2022, John, Reese, and Stephen arrived at Thomas's house, ready to ambush him. However, their plan did not go as expected. Instead of entering his house as anticipated, Thomas took his dog for a walk, forcing the conspirators to abort their attempt. Despite the setback, they remained undeterred, waiting for another opportunity to strike. Colleen, by all indications, was fully complicit in these plans, providing information and playing a crucial role in facilitating the attack. The tragic execution, a deadly assault. The conspirators' patience would not last long. Just 2 days later, on July 2, 2022, John was ready to execute his plan. Despite a setback when one of his associates, Stephen Quith, went missing after a night out at a swingers club, John refused to let another opportunity slip by. In his frustration, John enlisted the help of a 50-year-old family member, Cal Murphy, to drive them to the scene. Unaware of the true nature of their mission, Cal became an unwitting participant in the events that followed. That night, John, Reese, and another unidentified man arrived at Thomas's home, parking in the driveway of a neighboring house that they knew to be vacant. They waited in the van, knowing that Thomas would soon arrive. Just 5 minutes later, Thomas returned home and began unlocking his front door. In a swift and brutal attack, the men pounced on him from behind. CCTV footage captured the horrific assault as Thomas fought desperately to defend himself, but the attackers were relentless. For 40 seconds, Thomas endured a violent onslaught of punches, kicks, and multiple stab wounds. His screams for help echoed through the night as his attackers showed no mercy. Once Thomas was unable to fight back, they dragged him into his own home, stripping him naked and binding his ankles with duct tape. The attackers then began ransacking the house, searching for money, jewelry, and drugs. What followed was even more horrifying. In a fit of rage and brutality, the men tortured Thomas, pouring boiling water over his genitals and buttocks in an act of utter humiliation. They continued to beat, stab, and torment him for 2 hours, inflicting a total of 61 injuries. Despite their efforts, they failed to find the money they had come for and eventually fled the scene, leaving Thomas to die. In his final moments, Thomas managed to reach for his phone and dial emergency services. However, he was too weak to respond when the operator answered. Alone and in unimaginable pain, Thomas succumbed to his injuries. His death marked the tragic end of a series of events set in motion by jealousy, revenge, and a deadly misunderstanding of the consequences of their actions. This tragic case surrounding the brutal murder of Thomas Campbell unearths a disturbing tale of betrayal, conspiracy, and calculated violence. 3 pivotal aspects of the investigation highlight the depth of the crime: the discovery of Thomas' body by a neighbor, the police investigation that unraveled the plot, and the aftermath of the trial where justice was served, but left lingering questions about remorse, punishment, and the impact on Thomas' family. Discovery of Thomas Campbell's body. On the morning of June 30, 2022, Thomas Campbell's lifeless body was discovered by a neighbor named Lee, who had gone out for a bike ride around 7:30 a.m. As he passed by Campbell's house, Lee noticed something unusual. Thomas' front door was wide open. This seemingly innocent observation quickly transformed into a scene of horror when Lee approached the home to check if something was wrong. What he found would haunt him forever: the tortured and bloodied body of Thomas Campbell. It was immediately clear that Thomas had suffered not just a violent death, but had been subjected to hours of unimaginable pain. His body bore signs of extreme torture, with stab wounds, burns from boiling water, and numerous injuries inflicted during a prolonged assault. The condition in which he was found left no doubt that his death had been premeditated and executed with chilling brutality. Lee wasted no time in calling emergency services, who arrived shortly after to begin the initial investigation. Police immediately cordoned off the area and began examining the crime scene. The discovery of Thomas' body was only the beginning of what would become a complicated investigation, given the extreme measures taken by the perpetrators to cover their tracks. The police investigation unveils the plot. The police investigation faced significant challenges from the start. The crime scene provided very few clues, as the perpetrators had been careful not to leave any DNA evidence behind. Additionally, key CCTV cameras near Thomas' home were tampered with or removed entirely, making it difficult for investigators to trace the events leading up to the murder. However, a breakthrough came when police discovered a tracking device that had been placed on Thomas Campbell's vehicle. This discovery was crucial, as it enabled investigators to trace the movements of the van used by the perpetrators. Through the analysis of the tracker data, the police were able to identify the vehicle that had been used to stalk Thomas before the murder. This led them to a location known as Peak Forest, where they made another significant discovery. Several of Thomas Campbell's personal belongings, including his wallet and driving license, were found discarded, along with the burned remains of a mobile phone and a flask. The mobile phone, in particular, became a critical piece of evidence, as it was linked to the tracking device that had been used to follow Thomas in the days leading up to his murder. The forensic examination of the phone revealed damning evidence. It had been used to send numerous text messages and make phone calls connected to the conspiracy. This, along with call logs and text messages between Colleen Campbell and John Belfield, quickly led the police to suspect that the two had been working together. Colleen had provided key details about Thomas' whereabouts, including his vehicle's location and home address, directly to Belfield, who masterminded the plot to rob and murder him. The investigation also uncovered CCTV footage from Colleen's property that captured her taking a phone call from John Belfield just minutes before the attack on Thomas. This crucial piece of evidence placed Colleen at the heart of the conspiracy and directly linked her to the events leading up to the murder. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that Colleen's involvement was more significant than initially thought, despite her protests of innocence. The aftermath and the trial. The case went to trial in February 2023 at Bolton Crown Court, where Colleen Campbell, John Belfield, and the other key players in the murder faced justice. The trial lasted 5 weeks, during which each of the defendants pleaded not guilty to their respective charges. Colleen, in particular, insisted that she still loved Thomas and had no reason to want him dead. However, the evidence against her was overwhelming. The jury found Colleen guilty of manslaughter, acknowledging her role in the conspiracy and her complicity in the crime, but recognizing that she had not been directly involved in the murder itself. She was sentenced to 13 years in prison, with a minimum of 23 months to be served. This sentence sparked outrage among Thomas Campbell's family, who felt that Colleen's punishment did not reflect the gravity of her involvement. Thomas' brother, in particular, expressed deep frustration with the leniency of the sentence, believing that Colleen's betrayal and her role in orchestrating the attack should have warranted a harsher penalty. Reese Stephen, who played a central role in the brutal attack, was convicted of murder and received a life sentence with a minimum term of 37 years, reflecting the heinous nature of his crime. His accomplice, Stephen Quith, was also sentenced to life in prison, though he received a shorter minimum term of 12 years. While justice was served for some, the police were still unable to apprehend the final perpetrator, a man who remains unidentified to this day. Meanwhile, John Belfield, the alleged mastermind behind the attack, fled the country shortly after the murder. For nearly a year, he evaded capture, hiding out in Suriname, South America. Eventually, Belfield was arrested in South America and extradited to the UK to face trial, which was scheduled for June 2024. His arrest marked the final chapter in a long and complex investigation, though it left open the question of whether true justice had been served for all involved. In the aftermath of the trial, the family of Thomas Campbell continued to grapple with the loss and betrayal they had experienced. Initially, they had supported Colleen, believing her to be innocent. It was only after her arrest that they learned of her role in the conspiracy, a revelation that shattered their trust and left them reeling from the depths of her deceit. Tom's brother took custody of his children, stepping in to care for them in the wake of their father's tragic death. Though Colleen reportedly broke down in tears during the trial, there remains significant doubt about whether her remorse is genuine. Some speculate that her tears were more out of self-pity than guilt for her actions or concern for her children. To this day, the family of Thomas Campbell continues to seek closure and justice for the man they lost so tragically.